The evening air felt crisp against Officer James Mercer's face as he sat in his patrol car, parked strategically along Highway 16. The orange and pink sunset had faded into a deep blue, and the streetlights had just flickered on, casting pools of yellow light on the wet asphalt. It had rained earlier and the roads glistened like black mirrors under his headlights. James had been with the Portland Police Department for 5 years now. At 29, he was no rookie, but he wasn't a hardened veteran either. He liked to think he'd found the sweet spot, experienced enough to know what he was doing, but not so jaded that he'd lost his connection with the people he served. He took a sip from his travel mug, the coffee now lukewarm at best. The radio crackled with routine chatter, mostly quiet on a Tuesday evening. Most officers dreaded these traffic patrol shifts, but James didn't mind them. They gave him time to think, to watch the rhythm of the city, to notice patterns that others might miss. His thoughts drifted to his morning conversation with Chief Patterson. "You've got good instincts, Mercer," the chief had said during their monthly review. "But sometimes I think you spend too much time reading between the lines. Not every traffic stop is a mystery novel waiting to be solved." James smiled at the memory. The chief wasn't wrong. He did have a habit of looking for stories behind the ordinary. His ex-wife used to call it his detective complex. Maybe that's why they weren't together anymore. The radar gun on his dashboard beeped, pulling him back to the present. A car had just passed going 62 mph in a 45 zone. James straightened up, watching as the sleek black Audi continued down the highway, its taillights gleaming red in the darkness. "Well, there's tonight's excitement," he muttered to himself, flipping on his lights and pulling out onto the road. The Audi didn't immediately respond, and for a moment James thought he might have a runner on his hands. But after about 10 seconds, the car's turn signal blinked, and it smoothly pulled over to the shoulder, stopping in a perfect parallel line to the road. The precision of it caught his attention. Most people pulled over awkwardly at odd angles, clearly flustered by the flashing lights behind them. James called in the stop to dispatch, reading off the license plate number before stepping out of his cruiser. The standard procedure was so ingrained he could do it in his sleep. Approach from the driver's side, stay behind the rear window until the driver acknowledged his presence, keep his right hand free near his holster. Safety first, always. He approached the vehicle, flashlight in hand, and noted with approval that the driver had already lowered their window. The beam of light revealed a woman behind the wheel, probably in her late 20s or early 30s. His first thought was that she looked remarkably put together for someone who'd just been pulled over. Most people looked guilty, anxious, or annoyed when he approached their window. This woman looked calm, almost expectant. She wore a tailored navy blazer over what appeared to be a silk blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a neat, low ponytail. No visible jewelry except for small earrings that caught the light when she turned to face him. "Good evening, ma'am," James said, keeping his tone professional but not stern. "I'm Officer Mercer with the Portland PD." "Good evening, officer," she replied, her voice smooth and controlled. No tremor, no nervous pitch. Her hands remained visible on the steering wheel, perfectly positioned at 10 and 2, like she'd just stepped out of a driver's education video. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" It was a standard opening question, one that often revealed more in how people answered than what they said. "I imagine I was exceeding the speed limit," she said, with the hint of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Those eyes, James noticed, were studying him carefully, not with fear or concern but with assessment. "Yes, ma'am. I clocked you at 62 in a 45 zone. May I see your license and registration, please?" Without any fuss or the usual fumbling through glove compartments and purses, she handed over a driver's license and the car's registration. Her movements were efficient, practiced. James angled his flashlight to examine the documents. Elizabeth Canton. Age 31. The address listed was in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., not local. The car was registered in her name, a current year Audi with all the proper tags and stickers. "You're a long way from home, Miss Canton," James commented, looking from the license back to her. "Work brings me to the West Coast frequently," she replied simply. No elaboration, no nervous chatter about why she was in town or where she was heading. Most people felt compelled to explain themselves. To fill the silence, "I'll be right back with you," James said, returning to his patrol car to run her information. As he walked back, he found himself puzzling over the encounter. Nothing was wrong exactly. Everything was in order. But something felt off. Not in a threatening way, but in the way a tuning fork might be struck at a slightly different frequency. It was too perfect, too composed. Back in his cruiser, James ran her license through the system. The results took longer than usual to populate, which was the first unusual flag. When they finally did, he found himself looking at a sparse record. No previous violations, no outstanding warrants. But there was a notation on the file he'd rarely seen before. DS-7 protocol. DS-7 was a diplomatic security protocol. He'd encountered it only once before, during a traffic accident involving a foreign embassy vehicle. It essentially meant proceed with caution. This person has diplomatic connections. James glanced back at the Audi, where Elizabeth Canton sat waiting patiently. She wasn't checking her phone or fidgeting with the radio like most people did during the wait. Instead, she seemed to be gazing calmly ahead, occasionally checking her mirrors. His radio crackled to life. Unit 416, this is dispatch. Go ahead, dispatch, James responded, picking up the handset. Be advised, we're receiving a call about your current stop. Can you verify the plate number again? James frowned, reading off the license plate once more. 10-4. Stand by for a moment, please. The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. Finally, dispatch returned. Officer Mercer, please continue with normal procedure. You may issue a citation if warranted. That was odd. Usually, if someone was flagged in the system, he'd get different instructions. Either to let them go with a warning or, in rare cases, to wait for backup. This felt like someone had checked on him, then deliberately decided not to interfere. His curiosity piqued. James got out of his car and walked back to the Audi. As he approached, he noticed headlights further down the road. A vehicle had pulled over about 100 yards behind his patrol car, a black SUV with tinted windows. It hadn't been there before. Ms. Canton, he said, returning to her window. Are you aware that your license has a diplomatic security notation? She raised an eyebrow, the first real change in her composed expression. Yes, officer, I am. Are you a diplomat? He asked directly. No, she replied. Then after a pause added, I work for the government in a capacity that occasionally requires security protocols. James nodded slowly. He'd lived in the D.C. area for a while before moving to Portland. He knew the type, government employees who never quite specified which agency they worked for. I see, he said. And the SUV that just showed up behind us, is that part of your security protocol too? Her lips twitched in what might have been amusement or annoyance, it was hard to tell. They maintain a discreet distance, she said. They wouldn't have made themselves visible if they didn't notice you noticing the flag on my license. James felt a mix of professional concern and personal intrigue. This was far from a routine traffic stop now. Well, Ms. Canton, diplomatic connections or not, you were still speeding in my jurisdiction. He pulled out his ticket book and began writing. I'm going to issue you a citation for exceeding the posted limit. You can either pay the fine or contest it in court. If she was surprised by his decision to ticket her despite her obvious connections, she didn't show it. Instead, she nodded once, accepting the citation when he handed it to her. Drive safely, Ms. Canton, James said, handing back her license and registration along with the ticket. And maybe consider slowing down, especially on wet roads. Thank you, Officer Mercer, she said. And the way she said his name, like she'd been aware of it all along, sent a small chill up his spine. I appreciate your professionalism. As he turned to walk away, she added, You know, most officers would have asked a lot more questions. James paused, looking back at her. Would you have answered them? The smile she gave him then was genuine, reaching her eyes for the first time. Probably not. But it's interesting that you didn't try. With that cryptic comment, she rolled up her window and started her engine. James stepped back, watching as she pulled away at precisely the speed limit. The Audi's engine purring smoothly into the night. As he walked back to his patrol car, James noticed the black SUV had already disappeared. He stood for a moment in the cool evening air, the ticket book still in his hand, wondering what exactly had just happened. His radio crackled again. Unit 416, this is dispatch. Go ahead, he responded. Captain Hayes would like you to call him when you have a moment. Not urgent, just when you're clear. 10-4, James replied, climbing back into his cruiser. He sat there for a minute, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Elizabeth Canton. DS-7 protocol, a black SUV that appeared and disappeared. and now his captain wanted to talk to him. Just another routine traffic stop in Portland, he thought with a wry smile. Chief Patterson would have a field day with this one. Maybe he did find mysteries where there were none. Or maybe, just maybe, this time there really was more to the story. James started his engine and pulled back onto the highway, his mind still turning over the encounter, wondering what the next shift would bring, and whether he'd ever cross paths with the mysterious Elizabeth Canton again. Little did he know, this was just the beginning. James sat in his car outside the police station. His shift finished 20 minutes ago, but his mind still turning over the strange traffic stop from earlier. The call with Captain Hayes had been brief and oddly vague. "Mercer, about that stop tonight with the Audi," Hayes had said, his voice carefully neutral. "Anything unusual happen?" "Just a diplomatic security flag, sir," James had replied, curious about why the captain was asking. "Is there something I should know?" There'd been a pause on the line. "No, nothing specific. Just checking in. Good work out there, and that was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just good work," as if James had done something more significant than write a speeding ticket. Now, as the night shift officers began filing into the station for their briefing, James finally turned his key in the ignition. Whatever was going on with Elizabeth Canton and her mysterious government connections, it wasn't his problem anymore. He had tomorrow off, and he planned to spend it fixing the leaky faucet in his bathroom and maybe catching the Blazers game in the evening. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It was probably nothing. Black SUVs were common enough, but after tonight's events, his instincts were on high alert. He drove past it slowly, trying to get a look at the driver, but the windows were tinted too dark to see inside. James took a different route home than usual, making a few random turns along the way. The SUV didn't follow, and he gradually relaxed, laughing at himself for being so paranoid. "Get a grip, Mercer," he muttered to himself. "Not everyone's a spy." His small house on the outskirts of town was dark when he arrived, just as he'd left it that morning. James went through his usual routine, checking the mail, grabbing a beer from the fridge, microwaving some leftover pasta. Ordinary actions that helped settle his mind after a shift. He was halfway through his meal when his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Diane from dispatch. "Hey Diane, what's up?" he answered, setting down his fork. "James, sorry to bother you off duty," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. "But something weird is happening, and I thought you should know." James straightened up. "What kind of weird?" "That license plate you ran tonight? We just got a call from someone asking for a copy of the dash cam footage from that stop. Said they were from the Department of Justice. DOJ?" James frowned. "For a simple traffic violation?" "Exactly," Diane said. It went straight to the captain. "I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but you know how I feel about keeping officers in the dark when it's their own stops being questioned." James did know. Diane had been dispatching for 20 years and believed firmly that officers should be informed when their actions were under scrutiny. She'd saved more than one career with her timely heads-ups. "Thanks, Diane. Did they say why they wanted it?" "Nope. But here's the kicker. We ran a check on the number they called from. It's not DOJ. It's a number associated with the Central Intelligence Agency." James nearly dropped his phone. "The CIA? You're kidding." "Scout's honor," Diane said. "Look, I've got to go. Just wanted you to know. Whatever you stumbled into tonight, it's bigger than a speeding ticket." After they hung up, James sat in silence, his dinner forgotten. Elizabeth Canton, DS7 protocol, black SUVs, and now the CIA. His mind flashed back to her calm demeanor, her perfect composure, the way she'd seemed to be studying him. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Officer Mercer, please meet me at Powell's Coffee on 10th Street tomorrow at 10 a.m. Important to discuss tonight's incident." E.C. James stared at the message. How had she gotten his personal number? He thought about ignoring it, about reporting it to his captain. But curiosity, that detective complex again, got the better of him. "I'll be there," he texted back. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams filled with black cars and mysterious women with knowing smiles. The next morning dawned gray and misty, typical Portland weather. James dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a button-down shirt, and a light jacket, and arrived at Powell's Coffee 15 minutes early. He chose a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside, old habits dying hard. At exactly 10 a.m., Elizabeth Canton walked through the door. Gone was the formal business attire from the night before. Today she wore dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and a leather jacket. Her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders. She looked like any other young professional in Portland, except for the subtle alertness in her eyes as they swept the room, taking in every detail, including him. She smiled when she spotted him. Walking over with a confidence that seemed to part the busy coffee shop crowd, James noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its engine still running. "Officer Mercer," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming." "It's just James when I'm off duty," he replied, studying her face in the daylight. She was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and those watchful eyes. "And I'm curious why you wanted to meet, or how you got my number." Elizabeth smiled again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Getting your number was easy. As for why I wanted to meet..." She paused as a barista approached their table. "Can I get you anything?" The young man asked. "Black coffee, please," Elizabeth said. "Make that 2, James added. When they were alone again, Elizabeth leaned forward. "I owe you an explanation about last night. My security team reported that someone from the CIA contacted your department about our encounter." "So you do work for the CIA," James said, not entirely surprised. "No," she replied. "That's just it. Someone is impersonating CIA officials to get information about me. That's why I wanted to meet you, to warn you and to explain." Their coffees arrived, and Elizabeth waited until the barista was out of earshot before continuing. "I work for a different agency," she said, her voice lowered. "Department of State Special Security Division. We handle sensitive diplomatic matters." James took a sip of his coffee, considering her words. And why would someone from the CIA, or someone pretending to be CIA, care about a routine traffic stop involving a State Department employee? "Because I'm not just any State Department employee," Elizabeth said, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "And it wasn't a routine traffic stop, not really. I was being followed last night. Your pulling me over actually helped. It forced the people tailing me to back off temporarily." James raised an eyebrow. "You're saying I unknowingly helped you by writing you a ticket?" "Sometimes coincidences work in our favor," she said with a small shrug. "But now those same people are trying to figure out if our meeting was planned or accidental. They're checking your background, your dash cam footage, anything to determine if you're working with me." "Which I'm not," James pointed out. "No, you're not. But they don't know that." Elizabeth glanced out the window at the black SUV. "The men in that vehicle work for me. They're here for protection." James followed her gaze. "Protection from what?" "From whom?" she corrected. "There's a trade delegation in Portland this week. Some of the participants have interests that don't align with U.S. policy. We've received intelligence that they may attempt to access certain secure information. And you're here to stop them." James filled in, beginning to understand. "I'm here to ensure they don't succeed," Elizabeth said carefully. "It's prevention, not confrontation." James sat back, taking it all in. Part of him wanted to walk away from whatever complicated situation he'd stumbled into. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to puzzles and mysteries, was intrigued. "Why tell me all this?" he asked finally. "Why not just let me go about my life none the wiser?" Elizabeth's expression softened slightly. "Because you're now on their radar. The people looking for me know you pulled me over. They'll have questions for you. I wanted you to be prepared." "Prepared for what, exactly?" "For them to approach you," she said. "They might claim to be FBI, Homeland Security, or continue the CIA ruse. They'll try to get information about me, about why we met, about what I told you. And what should I tell them?" Elizabeth reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It looked official, with the Department of State seal in her name, but no phone number or email address. Just a QR code. "If anyone approaches you, give them this," she said, sliding the card across the table. "It's encoded with contact information that will connect them directly to my superiors, who can verify my identity and mission." James picked up the card, examining it. "And if I need to reach you?" "You won't," she said simply. "After today, we go back to our separate lives. You forget about me and I continue my work." Something about the finality in her tone bothered him. What if these people don't take no for an answer? What if they decide I know more than I'm saying? Elizabeth's gaze was steady. "Then scan the QR code yourself." It will connect you to a secure line. Someone will help you. She stood up, leaving her coffee mostly untouched. I've already been here too long. Thank you for meeting me, Officer Mercer. And for your discretion. James remained seated, looking up at her. You're welcome, Ms. Canton. Stay safe out there. For the first time, her smile seemed genuine. It's Elizabeth. And you too, James. She left the coffee shop with the same confident stride, sliding into the waiting SUV, which pulled away immediately. James watched until it disappeared around a corner, then looked down at the business card in his hand. Part of him wanted to scan it right away, to see if it was real or just another layer of mystery. But he tucked it into his wallet instead. Whatever game Elizabeth Canton was playing, he had a feeling it was far from over. As he walked back to his car, James couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. He glanced around the street, seeing nothing obvious, but his instincts told him something had changed. His ordinary life had been interrupted by this chance encounter, and he doubted things would go back to normal anytime soon. He was right. The very next day, everything would change again in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. James woke to the sound of his doorbell ringing. Bleary-eyed, he checked his phone. 5:47 a.m. Who would be at his door before 6 in the morning? The events of the past 2 days flashed through his mind as he pulled on a t-shirt and sweatpants. Elizabeth's warnings about people coming to question him suddenly felt less like paranoia and more like prophecy. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. James moved to his living room window and carefully peered through the blinds. 2 men in dark suits stood on his porch. Even in the dim morning light, they had the unmistakable look of federal agents, clean-cut, alert, and standing with the practiced patience of men used to waiting for doors to open. For a moment, James considered not answering. But ignoring them wouldn't make them go away. Better to face whatever this was head-on. He opened the door, leaving the security chain engaged. Can I help you? The older of the 2 men stepped forward. He was tall, with graying hair at his temples and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. Officer James Mercer? I'm Agent Wilson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Agent Chen. He held up a badge and ID that looked legitimate to James's trained eye. What can I do for the FBI at 5:47 in the morning? James asked, making no move to unchain the door. Agent Wilson's expression remained neutral. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a traffic stop you conducted 2 nights ago. May we come in? Diane's warning echoed in James's mind. These men claimed to be FBI, but according to her, the people asking questions had identified themselves as DOJ, and the number they'd called from traced back to the CIA. Elizabeth had warned him about exactly this, people using different agency identities to get information. I was just about to make coffee. James said, Give me a minute to get decent and I'll meet you out here on the porch. Before they could object, he closed the door and quickly moved to his bedroom. The business card Elizabeth had given him was still in his wallet. He grabbed it along with his badge and service weapon. Not that he expected to need it, but instinct told him to be prepared. In the kitchen, he started the coffee maker, more for the normalcy of the routine than any desire for caffeine. His mind raced. If these men weren't who they claimed to be, giving them Elizabeth's card might put her in danger. If they were legitimate FBI agents, he could be interfering with a federal investigation by withholding information. By the time he returned to the front door with 3 mugs of coffee balanced precariously in his hands, he'd made his decision. He would listen first, judge their questions, and decide how much to reveal. He unchained the door and stepped out onto the porch. Hope you gentlemen take it black, he said, handing each of them a mug. I'm out of cream. Agent Wilson accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Agent Chen didn't touch his, setting it on the porch railing instead. Officer Mercer, Wilson began, 2 nights ago, you pulled over a black Audi for speeding. The driver was a woman named Elizabeth Canton. We need to know everything about that encounter. James leaned against the doorframe, sipping his coffee. Not much to tell. She was doing 62 in a 45. I wrote her a ticket. End of story. Did she say anything unusual during the stop? Chen asked. His voice was softer than Wilson's, but no less intense. Define unusual, James replied. Most people try to talk their way out of a ticket. She didn't. That was unusual, I guess. Wilson's eyes narrowed slightly. Did she mention where she was going or where she'd been? No, James said truthfully. She said she was in town for work but didn't elaborate. And you didn't ask? Wilson pressed. It wasn't relevant to the traffic violation. The two agents exchanged a glance that James couldn't quite interpret. Chen pulled out a small notebook and consulted it. According to our information, you met with Ms. Canton yesterday morning at a coffee shop. Is that correct? James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. How did they know about that meeting? Had they been watching him? Or Elizabeth, or both? Yes, he admitted, seeing no point in denying it. She texted me and asked to meet. What did you discuss? Wilson asked, his tone sharpening. James took another sip of coffee, buying himself a moment to think. She apologized for speeding and explained that she works for the State Department. She was concerned that someone had contacted my department about the traffic stop, claiming to be from the DOJ. And why would that concern her? Chen asked. Because apparently they weren't really from the DOJ, James said, watching their reactions carefully. She said someone was impersonating federal agents to get information about her. Wilson's expression didn't change, but James noticed his posture stiffen slightly. Did she tell you why someone would be interested in her movements? Something about a trade delegation in town. She said she was here to prevent certain information from being accessed. James shrugged as if it had all seemed rather routine to him. To be honest, it sounded like standard government security work. Nothing that would warrant a 6 a.m. visit from the FBI. Officer Mercer, Wilson said, setting down his untouched coffee. Elizabeth Canton is not who she claims to be. She is not employed by the State Department or any other U.S. government agency. James raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Then who is she? That's classified, Chen cut in. But I can tell you she's a person of significant interest in an ongoing federal investigation. Any contact with her needs to be reported immediately. Like I'm doing now, James pointed out. Wilson's mouth tightened. We need to know if she gave you anything. Documents, data storage devices, contact information. The business card felt suddenly heavy in James's pocket. He had to make a choice right now with limited information. Trust these men who showed up at dawn, or trust the woman who'd warned him about exactly this situation. No, he said finally. She didn't give me anything except an apology for the confusion. Wilson studied him for a long moment, his experienced eyes searching for signs of deception. James met his gaze steadily, years of dealing with suspects helping him maintain his composure. If she contacts you again, Wilson said at last, we need to know immediately. He handed James a business card with a phone number but no agency identification or title. Day or night, call this number. James took the card, nodding. Of course. Anything to help? As the agents turned to leave, Chen paused. One more thing, Officer Mercer. For your own safety, it would be best if you didn't mention our visit to anyone, including your department. James's instincts flared again. Real FBI agents wouldn't typically ask a police officer to keep secrets from his own department. Understood, he said anyway. He watched as they walked to an unmarked sedan parked across the street. Only when they had driven away did he allow the tension to leave his shoulders. Something wasn't right about those agents. Their badges had looked real enough, but Elizabeth's warnings and their request for secrecy had him doubting everything. Back inside, James pulled out his phone and Elizabeth's business card. The QR code stared up at him, a digital gateway to answers, or maybe more questions. After a moment's hesitation, he scanned it with his phone. The screen remained blank for several seconds, then displayed a simple message. Verification in progress. A moment later, a phone number appeared. James dialed it immediately, his heart racing. Security Division, answered a clipped professional voice after just one ring. This is Officer James Mercer, Portland PD, he said. I need to speak with Elizabeth Canton. It's urgent. There was a pause, followed by the sound of keys clicking. One moment, Officer Mercer. I'm verifying your identity. The line went silent for nearly a minute. James paced his living room, adrenaline coursing through him. Had he made a mistake? What if Wilson and Chen were legitimate FBI agents and Elizabeth was the imposter? Officer Mercer, the voice returned. You've been cleared to receive information. Ms. Canton left instructions regarding your call. What instructions? James asked. She said to tell you, and I quote, the fishermen have cast their nets. Go to the river house. The voice paused. Does that mean anything to you? No, James admitted, confused. What river house? I'm not authorized to provide additional context, the voice replied. But a location has been sent to your phone. Ms. Canton recommended you leave immediately and bring nothing that can be tracked. She also said to tell you that the men who visited you this morning were not FBI agents. James's phone buzzed with a text message containing an address on the outskirts of town, near the Columbia River. How did you know about the men who visited me? Your home is under surveillance for your protection, the voice said matter-of-factly. Standard protocol when a civilian is inadvertently involved in an operation. The men left your property 7 minutes ago. You have approximately 20 minutes before they realize their covers have been compromised and return. The call ended abruptly, leaving James standing in his living room, the business card in one hand and the address on his phone screen. 20 minutes to decide whether to trust Elizabeth Canton and her mysterious security division, or to dismiss this all as an elaborate deception. His police instincts told him to call his captain, to report everything. But another part of him, the part that had recognized something special about Elizabeth from the moment he'd approached her car, pushed him toward the address on his phone. In the end, curiosity won out. James quickly changed into jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed his badge, gun, and a jacket. He left his phone on the kitchen counter. If they could track the visitors to his home, others could track his phone, and headed for his car. As he pulled away from his house, possibly leaving his normal life behind, James couldn't help but smile at the irony. For years, his ex-wife had complained about his detective complex, his need to solve every puzzle, to follow every mystery to its conclusion. Turned out, she'd been right all along. The address led James to a small cabin tucked away in a grove of pine trees overlooking the Columbia River. The gravel driveway wound through the woods, hidden from the main road, providing perfect privacy or perfect isolation, depending on how you looked at it. James parked his car behind the cabin out of sight from the road. The morning fog still clung to the river, giving the whole scene an otherworldly quality. He sat for a moment, engine off, listening to the silence broken only by birdsong and the distant sound of water. What was he doing here, following cryptic instructions from a woman he barely knew, running from men who might or might not be federal agents? If he'd encountered someone else in this situation, he'd have told them they were crazy. Yet here he was, driven by instinct and curiosity. The cabin door opened before he reached it. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, dressed in dark jeans and a gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked different, more alert, more focused than she had at the coffee shop. You came, she said, relief evident in her voice. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I, James admitted, until 2 men claiming to be FBI agents showed up at my door at dawn asking about you. Elizabeth nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Wilson and Chen, they're not FBI, so your people said. Who are they then? The interior of the cabin was surprisingly modern, with sleek furniture and technology that seemed out of place in the rustic setting. Large windows overlooked the river, but the glass had an unusual tint to it that James suspected was bulletproof. Private contractors, Elizabeth said, closing and locking the door behind him, working for interests that don't align with national security. They're very good at what they do, which includes impersonating federal agents. She led him into a small kitchen area where a pot of coffee was already brewing. The smell reminded James that he'd left home without breakfast, and his stomach growled in response. Sorry about the early wake-up call, Elizabeth said, pulling mugs from a cabinet. If I'd known they'd trace you so quickly, I would have warned you sooner. Trace me how? James asked, accepting the mug she offered. And why? I'm just a traffic cop who happened to pull you over. Elizabeth leaned against the counter, studying him. You're more than that, James. You're observant. You noticed things during our encounter that most people wouldn't. The security flag, the SUV, my behavior. You picked up on all of it. That makes you either a liability or an asset. James sipped his coffee, letting the warmth and caffeine clear his head. And which am I to you? That depends on what you do next, she said simply. Before he could respond, a door at the back of the cabin opened and a man stepped into the room. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. He wore a plain button-down shirt and khakis, nothing that screamed government agent. But the way he carried himself told James he was someone used to being in charge. Officer Mercer, the man said, extending his hand. I'm Thomas Reynolds. I'm Elizabeth's father. James nearly choked on his coffee. Whatever he'd been expecting, it wasn't this. He shook the man's hand, noting the firm grip. "Sir," Reynolds smiled slightly at James's confusion. "I'm also the Director of Central Intelligence. Welcome to my fishing cabin." The pieces clicked into place in James's mind. Elizabeth's diplomatic security flag, the unusual attention from multiple agencies, the high-level protection detail. She wasn't just a government employee, she was the daughter of the CIA director. "I think you'd better sit down," Reynolds said, gesturing to the living room. "We have a lot to discuss and not much time." James followed them to a seating area where maps and photographs were spread across a coffee table. He recognized aerial views of downtown Portland, the convention center, and several hotels. 3 days ago, Reynolds began, we received intelligence that a group of foreign operatives had entered the country, using diplomatic credentials as part of a trade delegation. Their real purpose was to access secure communications between our intelligence agencies and our allies. "And they targeted you?" James asked, looking at Elizabeth. She shook her head. "Not initially. I was sent to observe and report. Standard procedure. But something went wrong. They spotted me, recognized me as the director's daughter, and decided I could be useful leverage. Which is why she was speeding when you pulled her over," Reynolds added. "She was trying to lose a tail." "Your traffic stop complicated things for everyone," Elizabeth continued. "The operatives couldn't approach while a police officer was present. My security detail couldn't intervene without drawing attention. And now you were a witness who could potentially identify key players." James processed this information, his cop instincts kicking in. "So when these operatives couldn't get to you directly, they decided to question me using fake FBI credentials." "Exactly." Reynolds nodded. "They're trying to locate Elizabeth through you. That's why we've been monitoring your home. For your protection and hers." James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "All this because of a random traffic stop? It seems excessive." Reynolds and Elizabeth exchanged a glance that James couldn't quite interpret. "There's more to it," Elizabeth admitted. "The night you pulled me over, I was carrying sensitive information, data that could compromise ongoing operations if it fell into the wrong hands." "What kind of data?" James asked. "The kind that people kill for," Reynolds said gravely. "And now they believe you either have it or know where it is." The weight of the situation settled on James's shoulders. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was caught in the middle of something dangerous, something with national security implications. "So what happens now?" he asked. Elizabeth stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the river. "Wilson and Chen will be back. They'll assume you've contacted me. They'll search your home, your car, your life for any connection. And they won't be gentle about it." "Can't you arrest them?" James asked Reynolds. "You're the CIA director, for God's sake." Reynolds' expression hardened. "It's not that simple. These people have diplomatic immunity. We can't touch them without creating an international incident, and officially the CIA doesn't operate on U.S. soil. So I'm just supposed to what? Hide out here forever?" "No," Elizabeth said, turning back to face him. "We have a plan. But it involves you, and it's not without risk." James took a deep breath. Every instinct told him to walk away, to go back to his normal life writing traffic tickets and watching Blazers games. But he knew it was too late for that. He was already involved, whether he liked it or not. "Let me guess," he said with a wry smile. "I'm the bait." Reynolds looked surprised, then impressed. "You catch on quickly, Officer Mercer." Elizabeth moved to the coffee table and pointed to a map of downtown. "There's a reception tonight at the Riverfront Hotel. The entire trade delegation will be there, including our targets. They believe you have information about where I'm hiding or where the data is stored. So I show up looking nervous." James filled in. "They approach me. And you, what? Swoop in and arrest them in the act?" "Not exactly," Reynolds said. "We need evidence of their true intentions. Something that will override diplomatic immunity. We need them to reveal themselves." Elizabeth picked up a small object from the table, what looked like a regular tie clip. "This contains a recording device. You'll wear it tonight. All you have to do is get them talking. Get them to admit who they really are and what they're really after. And if they decide to skip the talking and go straight to more persuasive methods?" James asked. "That won't happen," Reynolds assured him. "The hotel will be full of our people. You'll never be alone or in real danger. Besides," Elizabeth added with a small smile, "you're a trained police officer. You can handle yourself. James stood up and walked to the window beside Elizabeth. The fog had lifted, revealing the broad expanse of the Columbia River. Somewhere out there, his normal life was waiting for him. But in here was a chance to do something that mattered on a larger scale. If I do this, he said finally, what happens afterward? Do I just go back to writing speeding tickets like nothing happened? Reynolds and Elizabeth exchanged another look. That would be up to you, Reynolds said carefully. Someone with your observational skills and instincts could be valuable in other roles. If you were interested, James turned to face them both. You're offering me a job? Let's just say doors could open, Reynolds replied. But first, we need to get through tonight. James thought about his life, the quiet house, the predictable routine, the nagging feeling that he was meant for something more. He thought about Elizabeth, her composure during the traffic stop, her careful warnings at the coffee shop. He thought about the fake agents who had shown up at his door, invading his world. All right, he said finally. I'm in. What's the plan? Elizabeth's smile was both relieved and determined. We have 12 hours to turn you from a traffic cop into spy bait. Let's get started. As they began to outline the details of the evening's operation, James couldn't help but wonder how a simple traffic stop had led him here. But one thing was certain after tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. The riverfront hotel glittered with lights that reflected off the water, creating the illusion that the stars had descended to Earth for the evening. James adjusted his tie as he walked through the main entrance, feeling both overdressed and underprepared in the tailored suit Reynolds had somehow produced in his exact size. Looking good, Officer Mercer. Elizabeth's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece nestled in his right ear. She and her team were monitoring from a suite 3 floors above the ballroom where the reception was being held. Easy for you to say, James muttered, keeping his voice low as he nodded to the doorman. You're not the one wearing a wire to a party full of spies. International trade representatives, she corrected, though he could hear the smile in her voice. And only some of them are spies. That's comforting, James replied dryly. The past 12 hours had been a crash course in espionage tactics. Reynolds and his team had briefed him on the key players, taught him basic counter-surveillance techniques, and drilled him on his cover story. He was attending as a guest of a local business owner who had connections to the trade delegation but couldn't attend himself. Remember, Reynolds' voice replaced Elizabeth's in his ear. You're not trying to fool professionals. We want them to know exactly who you are. Your job is to look nervous, out of place, and like someone with a secret. Should be easy enough. James resisted the urge to respond as he entered the ballroom. The space was elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river and dozens of round tables draped in white linen. Men and women in formal attire mingled, their conversations creating a pleasant hum punctuated by occasional laughter. Target 1 at your 2 o'clock, Elizabeth said, gray suit, red tie, talking to the woman in the blue dress. James casually glanced in that direction. The man was familiar, Agent Wilson or whatever his real name was, from his doorstep that morning. Their eyes met briefly and Wilson's conversation faltered for just a second before he smoothly continued, pretending not to recognize James. He's seen me, James confirmed, moving toward the bar, and he's pretending he hasn't. Perfect, Reynolds replied. Now we wait. Get a drink, look uncomfortable. Shouldn't be hard in that monkey suit. James ordered a club soda with lime. He wanted to keep his head clear, and positioned himself where he could observe the room while appearing to admire the view of the river. The reception was in full swing now, with waiters circulating with trays of appetizers and the noise level rising as more guests arrived. He spotted Agent Chen near the entrance, scanning the crowd. The man's eyes passed over James without pausing, another practiced non-reaction that confirmed he'd been seen. They're both here, James murmured. Now what? Now we see who they're working with, Elizabeth said. The real players won't approach you directly. Watch for anyone who speaks to Wilson or Chen and then looks your way. James sipped his drink, maintaining his position by the windows. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Wilson and Chen circulated separately through the room, speaking with various guests, none of whom seemed to take any special interest in James. Just as he was beginning to wonder if the plan was working, a new figure caught his attention. A woman in an elegant black dress entered the ballroom. She was striking, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone used to commanding attention. Something about her triggered James's instincts. New player, he said quietly. Woman in black just arrived. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Expensive jewelry, moving like she owns the place. There was a pause in his ear, then Reynolds's voice tense. That's Ambassador Renata Volkov, Russian diplomatic corps. But we've long suspected she has intelligence connections. She shouldn't be here. She's not part of this delegation. James watched as Volkov gracefully worked the room, exchanging pleasantries with various guests. When she reached Wilson, they spoke briefly and then both looked directly at James. I think I've been made, James said, setting down his glass. Volkov and Wilson just had a very obvious conversation about me. Stay calm, Elizabeth instructed. This is what we want. Let them come to you. Sure enough, Volkov began moving in his direction, her path casual but deliberate. James pretended to be engrossed in the view outside, his heart rate picking up despite his training. Officer Mercer, she said when she reached him, her voice carrying a slight accent. What a surprise to find Portland's finest at our little gathering. James turned, feigning surprise. I'm sorry, do I know you? Volkov smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. We haven't been formally introduced. Renata Volkov, Russian Embassy. She extended a manicured hand, which James shook briefly. My colleagues mentioned they had a fascinating conversation with you this morning. Did they? James replied, glancing toward Wilson, who was watching them intently from across the room. I meet a lot of people in my line of work. Indeed. Volkov moved closer, lowering her voice. They also mentioned you might have information about a mutual acquaintance. Elizabeth Canton? I don't know what you're talking about, James said, allowing an edge of nervousness to creep into his voice. Come now, officer, Volkov chided gently. We both know that's not true. The question is, what are you doing here? Did she send you? I was invited by a friend, James insisted. Volkov laughed softly. A friend, of course. She took a champagne flute from a passing waiter. Let me be direct since we're short on time. Elizabeth Canton has something that belongs to my government. We would very much like it back. And what would that be? James asked. Information, she said simply. The kind that could cause considerable embarrassment to certain parties. The kind worth a great deal to the right people. She glanced around the room before continuing, including people who could make a police officer's career very interesting, or very short. The threat was veiled but clear. James felt a surge of anger but kept his expression neutral. Are you threatening a police officer, Ambassador? Merely pointing out realities, she replied smoothly. We know you've been in contact with her since the traffic stop. We know you met at her father's property this morning. What we don't know is where she's hidden the data drive she was carrying when you pulled her over. Perfect, Elizabeth whispered in his ear. Keep her talking. I'm just a traffic cop, James said, letting frustration show in his voice. I wrote her a ticket. That's it. Then why did you go to a cabin registered to Thomas Reynolds this morning? Volkov pressed. Why are you here tonight at an event you clearly don't belong at? No, Officer Mercer, you're involved now. The only question is which side you'll choose. James hesitated as if considering her words. And if I did know something? What would that be worth? Volkov's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Now we're having an honest conversation. It would be worth a great deal. My government rewards those who help us. $500,000 transferred to an offshore account. A new identity if you want one. Protection. And all I have to do is tell you where Elizabeth Canton is hiding, James clarified, making sure the recording device captured every word. And the data drive, Volkov added. Both are equally important. What's on this drive that's worth so much? James asked. Volkov sipped her champagne. Information about Russian intelligence assets embedded in American institutions. Names, locations, assignments, the kind of information that could dismantle networks that took decades to build. You're admitting to having spies in the U.S.? James asked, wanting to be absolutely clear. Every nation spies, Officer Mercer, she said dismissively. The only difference is whether they're caught or not. Now do we have a deal? We've got her, Reynolds said in James's ear. Clear admission of espionage activities on U.S. soil. That overrides diplomatic immunity. Team moving in now. James saw subtle movement around the room as men and women who had been blending in with the crowd began to shift positions, closing in on Volkov, Wilson, and Chen. I think, James said, straightening his posture, that you just made a serious mistake, Ambassador. Volkov's expression hardened as she recognized the change in James's demeanor. "You're working with them," she said, taking a step back. Actually, Elizabeth's voice came from behind them. "He's working with me." James turned to see Elizabeth approaching, flanked by 2 agents. She looked striking in a midnight blue evening gown, but her expression was all business. "Ambassador Volkov," Elizabeth said coolly. "What a surprise. I wasn't aware you were part of the trade delegation." "Ms. Canton," Volkov replied, her composure remarkable despite being caught. "Always a pleasure." "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come with us," Elizabeth continued. "We have some questions about your recruitment of American assets and your operations on U.S. soil." Around the room, Wilson and Chen were being quietly detained by other agents. The rest of the reception continued, most guests oblivious to the counterintelligence operation unfolding in their midst. "This is an outrage," Volkov said, though she made no move to resist. "I have diplomatic immunity." "Not for espionage," Reynolds said, appearing at Elizabeth's side. "Your admission to Officer Mercer was quite clear, and quite well recorded." 2 agents stepped forward to escort Volkov away. She gave James one last look, a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. "Well played, officer. Perhaps you're in the wrong profession after all." As she was led away, Elizabeth turned to James. "You did well. Better than well. She told us everything we needed, so there was no data drive," James asked. Elizabeth smiled. "Oh, there was. But it was a carefully crafted fake, bait to draw them out. And it worked perfectly." Reynolds clapped a hand on James's shoulder. "The nervous cop act was excellent. You had her completely convinced." "Who says it was an act?" James replied with a weak smile. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him slightly shaky. As the reception continued around them, oblivious guests still chatting and drinking, James found himself in a quiet corner with Elizabeth and her father. "What happens now?" he asked. "Volkov will be declared persona non grata and expelled from the country," Reynolds explained. "Wilson and Chen will be charged under their real names. The network they were running will be dismantled." "And me?" James asked. "Do I just go back to writing tickets tomorrow like nothing happened?" Elizabeth and Reynolds exchanged a look. "That depends," Reynolds said. "How do you feel about a career change?" "You were serious about that," James said, surprised. "Completely," Reynolds nodded. "People with your instincts and ability to think on their feet are rare. We could use someone like you." "In the CIA?" James asked. "State Department, actually," Elizabeth corrected. "Special Security Division." "My division. We handle domestic counterintelligence operations that the CIA legally can't touch." James looked between them, his mind racing with possibilities. His quiet life as a traffic cop seemed very far away now. "I'd need some time to think about it," he said finally. "Of course," Reynolds agreed, "but not too much time. The offer expires in 48 hours. And what if I say no?" James asked. "What if I just want my normal life back?" Elizabeth's expression softened. "Then you go back to it with our thanks and a nice commendation in your file. No pressure, no consequences." "Somehow I doubt that," James said with a wry smile. "Nothing's going to seem normal after this." Reynolds was called away by one of his agents, leaving James and Elizabeth alone. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you'd be good at this. You saw through me from the beginning." "Not entirely," James admitted. "I didn't guess you were the CIA director's daughter." Elizabeth laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. "Well, I couldn't make it too easy for you." Outside the hotel windows, Portland's lights twinkled against the night sky. In less than a week, James's life had transformed from routine traffic stops to international espionage. Whatever he decided, he knew things would never be quite the same again. "So," Elizabeth said, offering him a fresh glass of champagne, "what do you think, Officer Mercer? Ready for a new kind of traffic?" James accepted the glass, considering her question as they looked out at the city below. "I think," he said finally, "that pulling you over was either the luckiest or unluckiest moment of my career." "And which is it?" she asked, her eyes meeting his. James smiled, tapping his glass against hers in a quiet toast. "Ask me again in 48 hours. The night stretched before them, full of possibilities as beyond the windows the river flowed steadily onward, carrying them all into whatever came next.